Welcome back to the archives. I'm your archivist, and tonight we are opening a file that has remained officially unsolved for over 50 years. It's a story that begins in the quiet woods of the Pacific Northwest and ends in the cold, dusty corridors of the FBI's most perplexing cold cases. It's a case that defied every conventional method of investigation, a puzzle with a missing piece that wasn't just a clue, but the victim herself. This is the story of a ghost who walked the earth, a young woman known to the world only as the Faceless Girl. It all began on a crisp autumn morning in October of 1972. The air in the forest surrounding the sleepy, isolated town of Havenwood, Oregon, was sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. A local birdwatcher named Arthur Gable, a retired man who knew the woods better than his own backyard, was hiking along a little-known trail when he saw something out of place. Tucked away in a small, sun-dappled clearing, almost as if she were taking a nap, was a young woman. She was lying on her back on a bed of fallen leaves, her hands folded peacefully over her chest. She was dressed in simple, well-kept clothing, a dark wool coat, a plain cotton dress, and sturdy leather boots. Her long dark hair was fanned out around her head like a halo. There was no sign of a struggle, no disturbed ground, no torn clothing. It was a scene of perfect yet deeply unsettling tranquility. Arthur called out to her, but she didn't stir. As he drew closer, a cold dread settled in his stomach. Her skin was pale, her lips were a faint blue, and her eyes were closed, as if in a deep, eternal sleep. She was gone. The local sheriff, a man named Bill Cobb, was on the scene within an hour. Sheriff Cobb had been the law in Havenwood for 30 years. He'd seen his share of hunting accidents and bar fights, but he had never seen anything like this. The first thing he noticed was the profound lack of anything. There was no wallet, no purse, no identification of any kind. No car keys, no bus ticket, not even a stray receipt in her pockets. It was as if she had simply materialized in that clearing. The second, and far more baffling discovery, came from the county coroner. The young woman, estimated to be in her early 20s, was in perfect health. There were no marks on her body, no signs of violence, no evidence of assault. Her lungs were clear, her heart was strong. An autopsy was performed and the medical examiner was stumped. He found no traces of drugs or common poisons. Her cause of death was officially listed as undetermined. She had simply stopped living. But the most perplexing part of the mystery was the woman herself. Her fingerprints were run through every state and national database. There was no match. Her dental records were compared against thousands of missing persons files. Nothing. The fabric of her clothes was unique, seemingly hand-woven, with no manufacturer's tags. Her leather boots were custom-made, but the cobbler's mark was one no one had ever seen before. In the language of law enforcement, she was a ghost. She had no past, no record, no name. She was faceless, not in a physical sense, but in a way that was far more profound. She didn't seem to exist in the world at all until the moment she was found. Sheriff Cobb and his small department were completely out of their depth. After 2 weeks of hitting one brick wall after another, he made a call that would elevate this strange case into a national mystery. He called the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI sent one of their best from the Portland field office, a young, ambitious agent named Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a man who believed in facts, evidence, and procedure. He believed that every puzzle had a solution, you just had to find the right key. He arrived in Havenwood with an air of confidence, certain that the resources of the FBI could crack a case that had stumped a small-town sheriff. He had no idea that this case would come to define his career, not for the triumph of solving it, but for the haunting weight of its failure. Agent Thorne started from square one. He had the crime scene re-examined with a fine-toothed comb. This time, they found something Arthur Gable and Sheriff Cobb had missed. Tucked deep inside the woman's coat pocket was a small silver locket. It was old, clearly an heirloom, tarnished with age. Thorne's heart quickened. This was it, the key. He carefully opened the locket, expecting to see a faded photograph of a loved one, a clue that could finally give this woman a name. But inside, there was no picture. On one side, there was a tiny, intricate engraving of a constellation. On the other side was a small, tightly folded piece of paper. The constellation was beautiful, a swirl of stars unlike any Thorne had ever seen. He sent a copy to the top astronomers in the country. The response was unanimous. It wasn't a real constellation. It didn't match any known star chart, ancient or modern. It was a fiction, a pattern of stars that didn't exist in the night sky. Disappointed but not defeated, Thorne unfolded the tiny piece of paper. On it, written in a delicate, almost calligraphic script, were a series of numbers. Just numbers. No words, no letters. It looked like a code. The FBI's cryptanalysts, the best code breakers in the world, went to work. They tried every known cipher, every possible key. They cross-referenced the numbers with dates, coordinates, phone numbers, and financial records. The result was the same every time: gibberish. The code was unbreakable. The case was growing colder by the day, the mystery deepening with every new dead end. They had a body with no cause of death, a victim with no identity, a star chart of a fictional sky, and a code that couldn't be broken. It was a case built on absences, on what wasn't there. Agent Thorne expanded the search for missing persons to Canada and even Europe, thinking she might have been a foreign national. He released a composite sketch of the Faceless Girl to newspapers and television stations across the country. Her serene, pretty face stared out from thousands of screens, yet no one came forward. No frantic parents, no worried friend, no ex-lover. It was as if no one on earth was missing her. The silence was deafening. Months turned into a year. Agent Thorne remained in Havenwood, a town that was now a part of his obsession. He interviewed every resident, followed every flimsy lead. He walked the trail to the clearing countless times, trying to see what he had missed. The locals started calling her the Havenwood Angel, a beautiful, mysterious visitor who had chosen their woods as her final resting place. But for Thorne, she was a constant, nagging reminder of his own limitations. The FBI poured immense resources into the case. They developed new forensic techniques to try and trace the unique pollen found on her clothes, hoping to pinpoint a geographic origin. The pollen came from several species of plants that shouldn't have been growing in the same region, some native to Oregon, others to parts of Appalachia, and one that was believed to be extinct for over a century. It was another impossible fact in a case made of them. They re-examined the autopsy results, bringing in specialists from around the world. One toxicologist from Germany proposed a radical theory, that she had been killed by a highly sophisticated, synthesized neurotoxin, one that was designed to mimic a natural cardiac event and break down in the body within minutes, leaving absolutely no trace. It was the kind of thing you'd read about in a spy novel. But who would use such an elaborate weapon on a seemingly ordinary young woman with no identity? And why? The questions piled up, each one more unsettling than the last. Was she a foreign agent? A member of a secret society? A witness in a protection program who had been found? Every theory they explored led to another dead end. The case file for the Faceless Girl grew thicker and thicker, a monument of unanswered questions. After 2 years of relentless, fruitless investigation, the FBI officially moved the case to inactive status. It became a cold case. Agent Thorne was reassigned, but the Faceless Girl never left him. He kept a copy of her file, and on quiet nights he would pull it out, staring at the sketch of her face, at the drawing of the fictional stars, at the string of meaningless numbers. He had been so sure he could solve it, that logic and evidence would prevail. But this case felt different. It felt like it operated under a different set of rules, a logic he couldn't comprehend. Years went by. Agent Marcus Thorne rose through the ranks of the FBI. He became a respected agent, known for his sharp mind and his tenacity. He solved dozens of other complex cases, putting dangerous criminals behind bars. But his colleagues knew there was one case that haunted him, the one they called Thorne's Ghost. He retired in 1998 after a distinguished career, but he never found peace. The Faceless Girl of Havenwood was the one mystery he couldn't solve, the one question mark that would follow him to his grave. And for decades, that's where the story ended. A perfect, unsolvable mystery. A local legend in a small Oregon town and a ghost in the FBI's cold case archives. The file was sealed, gathering dust, a testament to the fact that sometimes there are questions that simply have no answers. But the story wasn't over. It was just waiting for a new key, a new perspective. It was waiting for someone who didn't think like a cop. The year is now 2022, 50 years after the Faceless Girl was found. A young historian and archivist named Dr. Eris Thorne is cleaning out the attic of her late grandfather's home. Her grandfather was Marcus Thorne, the very same FBI agent who had led the original investigation. Eris had grown up hearing whispers of the case, the one great failure in her grandfather's storied career. She knew it had haunted him until the very end. In a dusty old footlocker, beneath stacks of old commendations and photographs, she finds a worn leather briefcase. Inside is not the official FBI file, but her grandfather's private notes on the case. It's filled with his own handwriting, his theories, his frustrations, his sketches of the locket and the code. It was his personal obsession, a puzzle he never stopped trying to solve. Eris, being an archivist, is captivated. She sees it not as a criminal case, but as a historical document, a story waiting to be read. She spends weeks poring over the notes, digitizing the documents and looking at the evidence with fresh eyes. The eyes of a historian, not a detective. She isn't looking for a killer. She's looking for context. She starts with the constellation in the locket. The FBI had concluded it was fictional, but Eris thinks differently. What if it wasn't meant to be a map of the sky? What if it was a symbol, a crest? She uses her research skills, diving into obscure genealogical records and texts on forgotten societies. She runs the pattern through databases of family crests, guild symbols, and religious iconography. For weeks, she finds nothing. Then, one late night, she gets a hit. It's not from a public database, but from a scanned, privately owned manuscript from the 18th century. The manuscript describes a utopian separatist group that had journeyed from Europe to the New World, seeking to build a society free from the corrupting influence of the modern world. They called themselves the Sylvan, a community dedicated to living in harmony with nature, completely off the grid. The manuscript contained a drawing of their symbol, the exact same constellation from the locket. According to the text, the Sylvan had settled somewhere in the vast, uncharted wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. They were rumored to be masters of botany and alchemy, possessing knowledge of the natural world that had been lost to time. They avoided all contact with the outside world, erasing their presence so completely that over the centuries, they faded from history into myth. Suddenly, some of the impossible facts of the case begin to make a strange kind of sense. The hand-woven clothes with no manufacturer, the custom-made boots, the pollen from plants that shouldn't grow together. What if they were cultivated in a hidden, isolated valley? The young woman's complete lack of a recorded identity. What if she was born in a place that had no birth certificates, no social security numbers, no digital footprint? Eris feels a shiver run down her spine. The Faceless Girl wasn't a ghost. She was from a world that was hidden in plain sight. Now, Eris turns her attention to the second piece of evidence, the unbreakable code. The string of numbers from the paper in the locket. The FBI's cryptanalysts had treated it as a complex mathematical cipher. But Eris the historian wonders if the key isn't mathematical at all. What if it's literary? Her grandfather's notes mention one other piece of evidence, something that was initially dismissed as unimportant. Found near the body, lying beneath a bush, was a worn copy of a book, Herman Melville's Moby Dick. At the time, it was assumed to be a coincidence, perhaps belonging to another hiker. But what if it wasn't? What if the book was the key? This was a classic form of cryptography, a book cipher. The numbers weren't a code in themselves. They were a set of directions. Eris hypothesizes that the numbers might correspond to a page number, a line number, and a word number. She gets a 1970 edition of Moby Dick, the same one mentioned in the evidence log, and she begins the painstaking process of decoding. The first number is 52. The second is 10. The third is 3. She turns to page 52, finds the 10th line, and then the third word. The word is forgive. Her breath catches in her throat. It works. For the next 2 days, she doesn't sleep. She meticulously decodes the entire sequence of numbers. Slowly, painfully, a message begins to emerge, not from a spy or a criminal, but from the Faceless Girl herself. It's a letter. A goodbye. The decoded message read, "To my dearest brother, forgive me. I had to see." The stories were not enough. I love our home, I love our family, but my heart ached for the world beyond the valley. You gave me this chance, and I will be forever grateful. But I was not made for this place of noise and steel, and I cannot return. The law is clear. Our secret is our survival. I take the final sleep now, as I was taught, so that no trace of our home can ever be found. Do not grieve for me. I saw the ocean. It was as beautiful as you said. I lived. Tell them I was brave. Alara. Suddenly, everything becomes clear. Her name was Alara. She wasn't murdered. Her death was a choice, a sacrifice. The Sylvan had a strict rule. Anyone who left could never return, to protect the community from discovery. If they were ever in danger of being caught or identified, they were to take a fast-acting herbal toxin, a compound unknown to modern science, that would induce a peaceful death and leave no trace. It was their ultimate failsafe to preserve their hidden world. The unbreakable code wasn't meant for the FBI. It was a personal message for her brother, the one who had helped her escape, who she knew would one day return to the clearing to look for her. The book, Moby Dick, a story of a great obsessive quest, must have been a favorite they shared. He had left it there for her, and she had used it to leave a message for him. The peaceful scene in the woods was not the work of a killer staging a crime scene. It was Alara preparing for her final moments. The fake constellation in the locket wasn't a map to the stars, but a symbol of the home she could never return to. A home that existed, hidden away in some remote, forgotten corner of Oregon. Eris leans back in her chair, the weight of the 50-year-old mystery finally lifting. The FBI couldn't solve the case because they were asking the wrong questions. They were looking for a murderer, for malice, for a conspiracy. They were searching for a crime, but this was never a story about crime. It was a story about love, sacrifice, and a world that chose to remain lost. Agent Marcus Thorne had been hunting a phantom killer who never existed. The real mystery wasn't who killed her. It was who was she and why did she die? And now his granddaughter had the answer. Eris thinks about what to do with this information. She could go to the press, to the authorities. She could become famous for solving the legendary Faceless Girl case. She could try to find the hidden valley of the Sylvan. But as she looks at the decoded letter, at the poignant final words of a young woman who died for a glimpse of the world, she knows she can't. Revealing the truth would mean betraying Alara's final wish. It would destroy the very thing she died to protect: her family, her home, her people's quiet existence. She carefully gathers all of her grandfather's notes, all of her own research in the decoded message. She places them back into the old leather briefcase. She closes the clasp, and with it, she closes the case for good. The world would continue to believe the case was unsolved. The FBI's file would remain a cold case. It was better that way. The Faceless Girl would remain a mystery to the world, but not to Eris. She finally had a name: Alara. And her story was not one of a victim, but of a brave, curious soul who made an impossible choice. In a way, Agent Thorne did solve the case. He just did it through his granddaughter, 50 years later. Eris felt a sense of peace, knowing that she had finally put her grandfather's ghost to rest. The question mark that had haunted him for so long had finally been replaced with a period. It was a quiet, private resolution, a secret shared between her, her grandfather, and a girl named Alara who had once dared to see the ocean. The archives are full of stories like this, cases where the truth is not what it seems, and where the solution lies not in the evidence, but in understanding the human heart. The Faceless Girl was never really faceless. She was just waiting for someone to read her story. Thank you for joining me in the archives tonight. The stories that are forgotten are often the ones that have the most to teach us. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more journeys into the unknown. Until next time, stay curious.